Republica, Argentina, land of silver. Ushuaia and Trek with Hans. Republica, Argentina, land of silver. At San Sebastian, we crossed into Argentina. Another large sign with a slightly different message declared, Las Malvinas son Argentinas, in reference to the islands we knew as the Falkland Islands, which were located 300 miles east of Argentina and almost 8,000 miles southwest of London, England, as the crow flies. The Falklands, or Isla Malvinas, had been ruled by the French, British, Spanish, and Argentinians since their discovery. In 1833, the British asserted its sovereignty over the islands, while at the same time Argentina claimed ownership of them. 149 years later, perhaps after a few shots of vodka, the president of Argentina, Leopoldo Fortunato Galtieri Castelli, thought it would be a good idea to attack the islands and start the Falklands War. The long and short of it, after 74 days of war, 649 Argentinians were killed, 1,657 were wounded, 11,313 were captured. 255 British were killed, 775 were wounded, and 115 were captured. 3 civilians were killed by friendly fire. British claimed victory. Argentina accepted defeat. However, from the looks of the Las Malvinas son Argentinas signs, they did not, and have not, accepted it gracefully. Not being entirely up on the local news of the day, what with being on a ferry through the fjords and hiking Torres del Paine and staying off the internet, as it really wasn't a big thing back in 2002, I wasn't aware of Argentina's current financial situation. Ushuaia. Arriving in Ushuaia and finding a hostel, I learned from the owner, Sebastian, that he had no idea what to charge for a night because the Argentinian peso exchange rate was unknown. 1 minute, it was 1-to-1 with the dollar. Then it was $1 to 10 pesos. The Argentinian financial market was crushed. No money at the banks. If you had 1,000,000 pesos, they might only be worth 100,000. Even so, the banks limited what you could withdraw. Unemployment was at 25%. To make money, Argentinians found work picking up garbage and collecting cardboard to sell to recycling plants. The prize on one of the popular TV game shows was offering the winner a job as a janitor. Sebastian approached the whole situation with, "Pay me whatever, whenever." I settled in and sort of became a resident at the hostel, having a bit of time on my hands before moving off to Antarctica. I kept myself busy with morning hikes up the Glacier Marshall, which overlooked the town, the Beagle Channel, and the white-capped mountains of Isla Navarino. I started to help Sebastian around the hostel. He was from Germany and overstayed his visa by a few years. Showing me his passport one evening with his very expired visa, he put his finger over his mouth. "Shh, Sebastian is illegal." Out in search of tinned tuna, I ran into a familiar face. It was the daughter of the guy from the sailboat who picked up the Swiss girl while we were traveling through the fjords. "Hey, aren't you traveling with your family? Sailing around the world? I met you in the fjords a week or so ago." She remembered me. "Yes, I remember. We are here doing some repairs." She had a bag of small engine parts and electrical knickknacks. "How was the trip down?" I worked on some small talk and was just sort of in awe of her. She didn't bite. "It's fine. We are busy. Lots of work to do on the boat and homework." "What do you have there?" "We have some electrical issues. Just some parts for the. She went into an electrical engineering language I didn't speak. Wow, you know how to do all that? My dad shows me and my brother. I can fix pretty much most mechanical and electrical problems on the boat. Look, I got to go. She studied the clouds. The temperature dropped and the atmospheric pressure is changing. I've been watching those clouds build up pretty quickly from the west. They are moving pretty fast, and I noticed all the birds are taking shelter. Need to get back before the storm hits. I watched her run across the street toward the harbor and thought, there will never be a man or woman out there who will ever meet the expectations she will require in a partner. Looking up at the sky, I thought, of course I noticed the birds taking shelter. Trek with Hans. It was a Sunday evening when I first met Hans. He was a tall, thin, quiet guy from Holland who was easy to talk with. He had a bag of hash that he smuggled in with him from Holland and was looking for someone to enjoy it with him. Looking for someone to share your weed or hash or shrooms with in a hostel anywhere in the world isn't a difficult task. We hit it off pretty quickly. His plan was to do some trekking, and after about an hour of conversation, he asked if I'd join him. We agreed to leave in the morning, 9 a.m. sharp. He had a hike in mind. At the time, I don't think the trek had a name. If it did, we didn't know it. I didn't even know how Hans knew about it. The trek was known as the Sierra Valdivieso Circuit. 28 miles long with 6,300 feet of elevation gain. Rolling a joint, Hans said it would take 3 days. Let me repeat that. Hans said it would take 3 days. Day 1 of 3. I found Hans sitting with his backpack and ready to go. He was hungover, smoking a freshly rolled cigarette and having a breakfast of toast and coffee. Huh. Where was he going? I wondered as I filled my coffee cup in the kitchen. For I, too, was hungover, and upon seeing Hans with his backpack, it occurred to me I had agreed to do a trek with him. Something I agreed to whilst partaking in far too much Gato Negro wine and a bit of his hashish. I turned to Hans. Oh, shit, am I going trekking with you today? Yes, he smiled. I'll wait. He knew I wasn't packed. Okay, 3-day trek. What did I need? Tent, sleeping bag, extra pair of socks, hat, jacket, and gloves. I wouldn't need a change of clothes. Groceries. I bought 8 tins of tuna, a couple baguettes, 2 blocks of cheese, some dried salami, and 3 liters of water. It was around 9:30 a.m. when we finally walked out the door and started our 4-mile hike to the trailhead. I knew it was 9:30 because I bought a new watch for an outrageous amount of money at the only outdoor equipment store in Ushuaia. Taxes on electronics in South America meant you paid twice the amount for the product than you would pay in the United States. The Casio Pro Trek Triple Sensor was a monster of a watch that not only told the time, but also did all the usual things like stopwatch, timer, etc. It also had a compass, altimeter, barometer, thermometer, and was water resistant up to 200 meters, which is 656 feet, according to the marketing literature. Far deeper than my deepest dive of 120 feet. But could it survive a free dive with Herbert Niche, the record holder for free diving at 253 meters? We hiked along the road to the trail for about 4 miles and then managed to get a ride for the last 4 miles. It was an overcast, gray day. I didn't notice any birds taking shelter, so concerns of rain were abolished. The trail started off easy enough, along a well-traveled, hard-packed stretch of dirt, which suddenly terminated without warning at the edge of a large peat moss bog. Just to the right of the terminus was a pile of animal bones, perhaps a warning sign to turn around. Go no further. Hic sunt dracones. Beware of dragons. We both agreed, looking at the map Hans had, that the mountains beyond the bog were where we wanted to go, and pressed forward through a mile of shin-deep peat moss. Every step was a struggle and an exercise in trying to keep your shoes from being sucked off, lost forever in this massive bog in the land of fire. The ground under the peat was uneven. We tripped and fell frequently, and by the end of it, we were drenched from shoulders to toes. We aimed for one of the several valleys in front of us, the middle and widest valley making the most sense to shoot for. The topographical map was completely useless. The contour lines were too distant and offered no understandable detail of the terrain. One could hardly tell the difference between the flat areas and the mountains. This would be a trailblazing exercise. Occasionally, we found a footprint in the mud, and that was enough to keep us moving forward. Our first day ended with a climb up some steep rocks and what felt like a half-mile struggle through dense vegetation that clawed at our every move, hampering any sort of speedy progress. Eventually, we found a small clearing that was relatively flat and set up camp. After our tents were set up and food prepared, I was happily surprised to see Hans produce a box of wine. We didn't talk much that evening, both a little wiped out. We sat in our wet clothes, ate our dinners, and drank wine until the sunset. Day 2 of 3. Hans rolled his own cigarettes and liked to take his time in the morning, enjoy a smoke and some coffee, slowly and carefully pack everything up. I preferred to get up, pack up, and get going. This was the biggest compatibility issue we had. We did a little recon without our packs and realized we were a bit off from where we should be, or at least where we thought we should be, as there was not a designated trail. Correcting our direction, the day started with a hike up a long ascent. Not steep or particularly difficult, just long. In 3 hours, we reached the tree line, which in this part of the world was 1,950 feet. Skirting a small nameless lake, we continued to ascend a scree field to the top of our first pass. Having no clue how far we had hiked, we did know from some notes Hans had about the hike that the first pass was 7 miles from the trailhead. Rather pathetic how long 7 miles had taken us. I looked at Hans. 3 days? He rolled his cigarette and gave me a smile. Descending the pass, we pressed through thick forest with steep declines. Often slipping, I would hear Hans shout, "God Almighty!" as we struggled through the dense flora. The forest eventually thinned out, and we found ourselves oftentimes trekking through knee-deep swamps created by beaver dams. Beavers were a major problem here in Tierra del Fuego. The Argentinian government decided that they wanted to start a fur trade industry. In 1946, 50 beavers were released into the wild. Now it was estimated there were over 200,000, and they were destroying the landscapes and protected trees. The dams were destroying grazing pastures. For Hans, it was the science behind these dams that kept him fascinated. For every beaver dam we came across, Hans would stop and study it, sharing with me the details of the dam, calculating things like volume and square meters and pressure and force. How do you know all this about dams? I was a professor of hydrology in Rotterdam before coming here. Sometimes, when explaining the science behind the structures, he would default to his native tongue and talk to me in Dutch. I responded with the occasional, "Aha." Then, after a few hours, I heard it. "Cory, stop! I can't go any further." We found a flat area near a waterfall in an open field of tall grass and set up camp. Day 3 of 3. It poured throughout the night. Sheets of rain and strong winds zipped through the valley in waves. I watched my barometer on my new Casio to see if it was changing, but the number stayed the same, and the rain kept coming. I killed time naming all the states in the United States and then their capitals. It was almost noon when the winds and the rain stopped. Hans emerged from his tent, sat on his backpack, and rolled his cigarette. We took our time preparing a late breakfast while allowing our tents to dry under what was now a clear blue sky. We continued north and moved up another ascending valley, this time along a creek which was framed with thick foliage. Once again, we found ourselves above the tree line where we stopped for lunch. Looking at the map, we knew at some point we needed to go up one of these steep, scree-laden mountains to the west. It was just really hard to know which one. The key feature we were looking for and should come across was a mountain lake named Lago Azul, which we both assumed would be a very blue lake based on its name and the notes Hans had which said, "We would know it when we see it." Studying our options and our surroundings, we finally agreed on which mountain we would ascend. I led the way. Choosing a landmark, I found a lonely bush and went to it. Once reached, I found a boulder as my next landmark and went for that. With the zigging and the zagging ascending this mountain of scree, you needed to home in on a landmark. Although not 100% proven, it is said that those who hike where no trails are and use no landmarks to guide them end up hiking in circles. Some say it's because one leg is longer than the other. Some say it's because we have a dominant eye that misaligns us. And others say human tendency is to make a right turn when coming across obstacles, like a tree or stones. Whatever the real reason, my experience has been to find a landmark and aim for it. The line to the landmark may not be straight, but your direction will be true. About an hour into our ascent, a snow blizzard came out of nowhere. 1 minute, it was clear and sunny, and the next, our visibility dropped to just a few feet. I lost sight of Hans, and we both found ourselves completely exposed on the side of a mountain. We had no choice but to wait it out. Yelling over the winds, we agreed if, after 30 minutes, the storm didn't let up, we would descend back down and try again later. As quickly as the blizzard appeared, it suddenly was gone. Looking down to the south, I saw a large plateau. In the center of the plateau was a small, yet very intense, blue lake. I felt no need to ask if this was the proverbial singing bush. This had to be Lago Azul. The climb down was just as slow and daunting with the loose scree and steep slope. In the end, we survived, although injured. Hans had punctured his hand on a sharp stone after a fall, and I had a nasty cut on my knee. By the time we had set up camp and cooked dinner, all the snow had melted. That night, out of the blue, Hans told me his story about why he was in South America. Sharing didn't appear to come naturally for him. A while ago, I was at a concert in Amsterdam. I met a girl, and that night, well, 9 months later, she had a baby girl. I told her I wanted to be part of our daughter's life, but she didn't seem to think that that was a good idea. I spent the last 6 months fighting for visitation rights in the courts and finally won. In Holland, anyway. After the decision was made, she took our daughter and moved to Belgium. I have only seen my daughter once. So I quit my job as a professor and headed to South America to see where life would take me. Day 4 of 3. We woke up to everything white. A heavy snowfall covered the ground, the mountains, our tents, everything. Behind us was a long ridge. Over breakfast, we discussed which pass we wanted to shoot for. By the time we made our decision, tore down camp, and packed up, the snow had melted, and a bright new day was upon us. The climb up to the pass was steeper than the scree-covered mountain we had overcome in our search of Lago Azul. The descent on the backside was steeper yet. But we were going down, and the slipping scree sped up the descent. And just like that, we reached vegetation and warmer temperatures. There was just one more short climb over a lush, green, treeless mountain. At the top, we were exposed to the intense winds Patagonia was known for. Every once in a while, a gust would hit us so hard it would cause us to stumble. Wind was to Patagonia as haggis was to Scotland, or vodka was to Russia. Trees grew bent or sideways here from the unrelenting wind. Most of the year, winds blew around 12 miles per hour consistently. When the wind really picked up in the summer, 70 miles per hour was not unheard of, and 100-mile-per-hour winds have been recorded. This was the playground of the 8 wind gods I had met head-on in South Dakota. Barrow Island, off Australia, held the distinction of the highest ever recorded wind, 253 miles per hour, on April 10, 1996. Descending, I came across a pile of garbage that some previous hiker left behind. Tucked under a bush was a bunch of food packages, some paper trash, an empty tube of toothpaste, plastic bags, and a wool sweater. Irritated, I shoved the trash in my pack and descended the backside of the mountain toward a greener and warmer setting. Our last night, we built a fire, using some of the trash I collected as kindling. It was at this point we realized a campfire was what was missing the past few nights. We had a great night, drinking the last liter of wine and sharing stories. Tomorrow, we would be able to shower and enjoy a warm bed. It should be noted, to build a campfire this far south in Patagonia was more of an exercise of creating a tremendous amount of smoke with the occasional flame. Everything was so wet and moist that even the dried-out deadwood was saturated with water. So, in retrospect, I suppose we built a camp smoldering that night. I take pride in my ability to start a campfire out in the wild, so it was humbling to not actually get a fire going. I later learned the indigenous Yugun people of the area had the same problem. Their solution was simple. Once they got their fires going, they kept them going, constantly, even carrying them if they had to. Spanish explorers passing through the channels would see fires dotting the shorelines, and thus named the region Tierra del Fuego, Land of Fire. Day 5 of 3. Something about returning from a multi-day trek puts a smile on your face. Even though this was day 5 of our 3-day excursion, I wouldn't have changed anything about it. I didn't care how long Hans needed to start his day. After 8 hours, we reached the peat moss that we navigated through on day 1. The trail we were on was a hard-packed dirt line that skirted the moss and dumped us out onto Ruta 3. It wasn't long before we hitched a ride back with the guy who ended up inviting us to his cabin for dinner. "Hey, Cory, you want to go for a 3-day trek?" Hans asked with a smile. We partook in some of Hans's hash, enjoyed a pasta dinner, and chased it all down with wine. I thought about our excursion. 2 guys from opposite sides of the world, having almost nothing in common, taking part in a rather challenging trek that could have ended up fatal, as neither of us knew the other's experience level or capabilities. Yet, we managed to come together and work through and problem solve the challenges thrown at us. negotiating which pass or valley to advance to and over, navigating bogs and thickly vegetated forests, scree fields and blizzards, and in the end, laughing and appreciating the time we had together, albeit they were just 5 days. Hans left 2 days later. I kept in touch with him for a while. Last report was he got a job with the Bolivian government as a hydrologist. I don't know if he was ever able to see his daughter again. Oh, and the wool sweater I found. After having it laundered, it fit just fine, becoming a welcome addition to my wardrobe.